Good evening. We're glad that Brother Weaver can be with us in the assembly tonight. Led a very beautiful prayer. Appreciate him and his good family and for their strong support of this congregation for many years now. Good to see all of you. Welcome fall back. It came in, actually this morning was kind of muggy and hot, and then around 10 o'clock I thought, why did I not bring my jacket with me today? And I've been trying to catch up with my body temperature ever since. But this is that time of year in Georgia when they say if you don't like the weather, just wait a few minutes, it'll change. And indeed, it did do that today, but I'm very thankful for that change. 1 Samuel chapter 10 is where we'll begin our study this evening. While you're turning there, anyone, volunteer and tell me, describe for me, Israel, the land of Israel, prior to the establishment of a monarchy. How would you describe the people of Israel living in the land of promise? What kind of nation were they? Were they a nation? Were they something else? How would you describe them politically? They were what? Confederation is a word that certainly would be appropriate. For hundreds of years, there was a confederation of tribes that would mutually help and support and encourage one another, sometimes attack and annihilate one another, as in the case of the Benjamites, who late in the period of the Judges was almost completely eradicated because of immorality in their midst that went unchecked. And the Benjamites put up a good fight, by the way, and a lot of people lost their lives in that horrible, bloody struggle. But nevertheless, Israel survived, and the tribe of Benjamin was brought back to life through cross-pollination, if you will, from some of the other tribes. But by the time we get to the days of Samuel, it was enough of a tribe that God would choose the first king for this newly established kingdom. And so we've moved from a loose confederation of tribes, 12 distinct tribes, or should we say 11 or 10, depending on how you count them, to primary tribes, Ephraim and Judah, the dominant tribes, one more to the north, one more to the south. And so we have dominant tribes among those of the tribes that were there in the land of Palestine. Now we have a whole new arrangement. And that's what we're reading about, is a transformation that's taking place. It's monumental. It's not something that you can snap your fingers and make it happen. It takes time to make it happen. And I don't know about you, but as we go through some of what we're reading tonight, I can't help but think about what's happening in the news today, right here in this country. We are still a year out from a presidential election. It was a year ago that we elected President Trump. And we're still, as a nation, trying to come to terms with the election of President Trump. And about maybe 40% of the nation is not willing to accept President Trump as their president. People at my job every day say, he ain't my president. And very proud to say he's not my president. Fascinating when you read what we're about to read, 1 Samuel chapter 10 and 11. Let's just begin reading the text. Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on his head, that's the head of Saul, and kissed him and said, is it not because the Lord has anointed you commander over his inheritance? When you have departed from me today, you will find 2 men by Rachel's tomb in the territory of Benjamin at Zelzah, and they will say to you, the donkeys which you went to look for have been found. And now your father has ceased caring about the donkeys and is worrying about you, saying, what shall I do about my son? Then you shall go on forward from there and come to the terebinth tree of Tabor. There 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you, one carrying 3 young goats, another carrying 3 loaves of bread, another carrying a skin of wine, and they will greet you and give you 2 loaves of bread, which you shall receive from their hands. After that you shall come to the hill of God, where the Philistine garrison is, And it will happen when you have come there to the city that you will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place with a stringed instrument, a tambourine, a flute, and a harp before them, and they will be prophesying. Then the Spirit of the Lord will come upon you, and you will prophesy with them and be turned into another man. Let it be, when these signs come to you, that you do as the occasion demands, for God is with you. You shall go down before me to Gilgal. Surely I will come down to you to offer burnt offerings and make sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days you shall wait till I come to you and show you what you should do. So it was, when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, that God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass that day. When they came there to the hill, there was a group of prophets to meet him. Then the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. And it happened when all who knew him formerly saw that he indeed prophesied among the prophets, that the people said to one another, "What is this that has come upon the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" Then a man from there answered and said, "But who is their father?" Therefore it became a proverb, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" And when he had finished prophesying, he went to the high place. Saul's uncle said to him and his servant, "Where did you go?" He said, "To look for the donkeys. When we saw that they were nowhere to be found, we went to Samuel." And Saul's uncle said, "Tell me, please, what Samuel said to you." So Saul said to his uncle, "He told us plainly that the donkeys had been found, but about the matter of the kingdom, he did not tell him what Samuel had said." Then Samuel called the people together to the Lord at Mizpah and said to the children of Israel, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt and delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all kingdoms and from those who oppressed you. But you have today rejected your God, who himself saved you from all your adversities and your tribulations. And you have said to him, 'No, set a king over us.' Now therefore, present yourself before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans." And when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. When he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was chosen, and Saul the son of Kish was chosen. But when they sought him, he could not be found. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord answered, "There he is, hidden among the equipment." So they ran and brought him from there. When he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen, that there is no one like him among all the people?" So all the people shouted and said, "Long live the king!" Samuel explained to the people the behavior of royalty and wrote it in a book and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul also went to his home to Gibeah. And valiant men went with him, whose hearts God had touched. But some rebels said, "How can this man save us?" So they despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. Chapter 11. Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh Gilead said to Nahash, "Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you." And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, "On this condition I will make a covenant with you, that I may put out all your right eyes and bring reproach on all Israel." The elders of Jabesh said to him, "Hold off for 7 days, that we may send messengers to all the territory of Israel, and then if there is no one to save us, we will come out to you." So the messenger came to Gibeah of Saul and told the news in the hearing of the people, and all the people lifted up their voices and wept. Now there was Saul coming behind the herd from the field, and Saul said, "What troubles the people that they weep?" And they told him the words of the men of Jabesh. The Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard this news, and his anger was greatly aroused. So he took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, "Whoever does not go out with Saul and Samuel to battle, so it shall be done to his oxen." And the fear of the Lord fell on all the people, and they came out with one consent. When he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who came, "Thus you shall say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow by the time the sun is hot, you shall have help." The messengers came and reported it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, "Tomorrow we will come out to you, and you may do with us whatever seems good to you." So it was on the next day that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch, and killed Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it happened that those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is he who said, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring them in, that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they made sacrifices of peace offering before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. You can understand, I suppose, the reluctance of some to accept Saul as their king. We're not told who these individuals were that were unwilling to embrace him initially as their king. Could be there were some from the tribe of Judah, maybe some from the tribe of Ephraim, who thought of themselves as being from a superior tribe, and maybe we should have been chosen. We're part of the establishment, and you should have taken us. We're part of the swamp, and we certainly know better how to run Israel than any renegade from the tribe of Benjamin. Perhaps that's the way they're reasoning. I'm sure if CNN was reporting on it, that's probably how they would have presented it. But nevertheless, that was the situation here. So I want you to think about what we just read. I mean, we transitioned from a confederation of tribes to the initial anointing of the king, to having some rabble-rousers saying, "He ain't our king," to finally, when all of this comes to a head and he proves himself a great military leader, but not just a military leader, but one who's able to bring the tribes of Israel together, then there's a cry on the part of some, who were those rabble-rousers that said such things? Let's put them to death. Notice Saul is very careful here. They're not going to be put to death. That's not going to happen. There won't be any repercussions because they were reluctant to follow me. You can almost understand, however, I think, under those circumstances, why some probably would be reluctant to follow Saul. But I would like to raise this question. And this is kind of digressing from the text, but you know kind of what I'm thinking already. I'm really disturbed about what's happening today in our country. And I'm disturbed about the great divide that we see in our country. It has reached the point where you really, truly can no longer reason with people on the other side. They will not listen to you. They simply will not have dialogue with you. Their mind is made up. That's the way they feel. And that's, I'm sorry to say, on the other side, seem to be dominated by feelings and emotions rather than just reasoning. And so how do you deal with it? And I'm fearful that if there's ever to be unity again, like we used to see in days gone by, that if we ever to be united again as a nation, it may require some Ammonite threatening us with nuclear holocaust or something else to unite the nation. However, I almost fear because the ideas that are behind the divide are so firmly entrenched in the hearts and minds of so many. They've been so fully indoctrinated with a different worldview. I'm not sure that even a war would rally them to stand for their flag and their Pledge of Allegiance and to say, yes, I'm an American, and yes, I will defend this great country. I don't know about you. These trends we're seeing today are deeply disturbing to me. We really must find a way to bring unity and peace and healing as a nation of people. I'm just not sure outside of a war, or even if that would be enough to do it. But certainly, that seemed to be the catalyst here in the time of Saul when he's trying to bring together a group of these tribes to form them into a united kingdom under his leadership. It took actual military campaign for this to become a reality. Perhaps you have some thoughts. Perhaps you have some ways to bridge that gap. I'm simply saying this because sometime when I'm standing in the break room ready to clock in the morning, I'll just say something out loud. And some of my fellow officers will hear me, and they're like, they're really violently opposed to what I'm saying. And I'm like, I just said, I think we should stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I think it's bad that we don't do that. And I'm castigated by a fellow officer because, we don't have to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm like, I don't know. It's just something about that bothers me. I'm like, and it ought to bother all of us, I think. It ought to trouble us. I understand freedom of speech and all that, but it just seems rather moronic to me to say we're going to decry and desecrate and disrespect the very symbol that says you have the right to do that. I just don't understand that mindset. Anyway, it's the kind of thing that we really need to deal with. And of course, at the bottom of all of it is a lot of racial tension. that, in my mind, is insane. I don't understand why we still have this racial divide. Someone seemed to be fomenting racism. And I think that's really what's happening. I don't know that it's so much what police officers are doing, although that's the way the news reports it. I just gave it away, didn't I? Yeah. You understand who I think now is fomenting this. Of course, when you think about the liberal media, they are going to try to divide us as a nation. They're going to try to report things to propagandize us, to believe that you've got this police force out here that's full of a bunch of racists and bigots, and they're just out here to hurt people, and that's all they are, and they don't care about the average citizen. You know, that's really, really going far beyond anything decent and respectful. Are there bad police officers? Of course. Are there bad preachers? Yes. Are there bad firemen? Yes. Are there bad doctors? Yes. Are there bad seamstress? Yes. There are bad people everywhere you go, but to make it sound like we got a police force that's out here trying to stir racial tension, sounds to me like someone's trying to keep us divided as a nation. This nation needs to be united together. When I was a kid, I was taught in school the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance. Of what? Of the what? Of the what? Of the United States of America. And to the, for which it stands. One nation. Under God. Indivisible. Justice for all. And so here we are. When you think about what that says, that pledge, and we're going to do the opposite.
Did they take that out of school too?
They've taken it from being mandatory. You no longer have to say it. And so you can imagine, I mean, we got school teachers. You could tell us if it's a problem in school. I don't know. Maybe not so much around here, I wouldn't think. But anyway, it's tragic to me. And I'm sorry, I know I'm digressing from this text. And I know I'm getting a little bit, but I think sometimes at some point we just need to address what's happening in our communities. And this is not something that's happening just on the news. I'm telling you, when you're out in the community and you're talking to people every day, this is what's on their minds. And I think a lot of it's because fake news is telling us that that's what it is. And so we're all in fear and we're all trembling and shaking in our boots that things are really that bad. I just don't know that many bigots. I don't know that many racists. But to listen to the news, you think everybody with white skin is a racist. I'm sorry. That's offensive to me. And I'm sick of hearing it. And I think it's time that people stood up and said, enough of this already. Stop it. You know, we need to get past the childishness. We need to get past the division. And let's get back to being one nation under God. And if that's where our focus was, if we were truly convinced that we need to follow God and His teaching, all of this other stuff would work itself out. Have we had problems as a nation? Yes. Did Israel have problems? Yes, they did. But they found a way to unite themselves. And again, I believe we as a nation need to find a way to unite ourselves. Now I want you to ask another question about this reading. This came up in a class I took back in 1993. The book I was assigned for the class was Prophets or Madmen, was the title of the book. And it was kind of an interesting look into the behavior of prophets of the Old Testament. One prophet was told to prophesy naked for a considerable period of time. Did you know that? Okay. A prophet was told by God to prophesy naked. Did you know that? Another was told to prophesy with all of his stuff on his back. Another was told to climb through a wall. Prophets were sometimes feared by people because they were different. When you think about, for example, Elijah, people were afraid of him. Why?
He stopped the rain.
Well, they could do a lot of things. He had great power associated with his ministry. But when John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah, we're not hearing so much about miracles, but we hear about someone that's different. He wasn't your run-of-the-mill person. He lived out in the wilderness. He ate locusts and wild honey. He had odd clothing. He was an interesting person. And yet he attracted a lot of people and, of course, made a great impression. I'm saying all that to say this. When Saul met this group of prophets, they were playing musical instruments. So the question comes up, what does it mean when it says they were prophesying? Does it mean they were speaking about future events? Or does it mean they were singing songs? Well, it could mean either one. Or it could be, or both. Because prophesying can include singing or reciting musical songs and ideas. And so maybe they were just singing. And this is no disrespect, but I think about a Coca-Cola commercial back in the 1960s, early 70s. I like to teach the world to sing, You know, those hippies, sitting on the hillside or whatever. You think about hippies, and playing their tambourines and their stringed instruments and wearing weird clothes. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm simply saying what the text said. And when people saw Saul doing that, they said, is Saul also among the prophets? And then they asked, who is their father? In other words, this is a group of nobodies. And what's this son of a rich man? Kish was a rich man. Why is this son of a rich man hanging out with these weirdos? That's what we would say. And that's probably how we look at it. And I think Burton Kaufman's probably right. This proverb, is Saul also among the prophets, was not a compliment. It was probably anything but a compliment. They were thinking this rather odd for him to be associating with these not very sociable people. They're kind of weird people. They probably ate granola bars or something. I don't know. They're not like the rest of us. And they're playing their tambourines and their stringed instruments and prophesying. And there he goes with them, doing that too. Whatever that was. But it is a fact that the Spirit of God came upon him. And like some of the judges that came before him, allowed him to have extraordinary strength and or power, maybe wisdom, maybe all the above. I do know this, that because the Spirit of God had come upon him, when there was a threat from the Ammonites, he became very angry. Is it wrong to be angry? No, it isn't. Sometimes it's right to be very angry, isn't it? And he was very angry because the Spirit of God came upon him and made him very angry. So he's very angry. And so he's so angry he takes oxen and cuts them into pieces. Didn't even cook them. Apparently just took their body parts and sent them to all the tribes and said, I'm going to do your oxen the same way if you don't come help me. I can hear the reporters now. He's so crude in his speech. So undignified as a king. We certainly don't want to go out on a foreign country on some field trip. You're going to embarrass a country. It worked. He got all the regular folks to rally, bring their pitchforks and whatever, and they went to battle and they were victorious. So he was certainly wise in doing this. 3 times he's anointed king. The first time it was a private ceremony, and Samuel anointed him with oil. And the text says kissed him. Kissing him is not necessarily part of the anointing service. I believe probably this is an indication that Samuel liked Saul personally. And I know it sounds weird, guys, but in that part of the world, when a guy liked another dude, he would kiss him. Not in the way you would kiss a girl, but kiss like they still do in Oriental culture. They kiss each other on the cheek or whatever. Maybe sometimes just kiss like the Chilean. They just kind of kiss in the air and it's kind of close to your face. But anyway, he kissed him. An indication of some strong bond of affection. Samuel liked Saul. And there's this friendship that's developing early on. And so he anoints him. Then he tells him about the signs, and all of them came to pass. Then he anoints him at Mizpah in front of all the people. But everyone didn't accept him. Then he anoints him again. There's a rededication after the great victory at Gilgal. And so 3 times it took to convince Israel, this is your king. And so he was fully ensconced as their new king. And of course, Samuel is going to say more about that in chapter 12. But any thoughts or comments you might have? Anybody? What can you tell me about Saul so far? What, other than what we've already said, Any observations about him as a man?
So far, so good.
Okay. We know from chapter 9, chapter 8, chapter 9, from last week, that he was a good-looking man. In fact, the Holy Spirit said he was the best-looking man in all of Israel. That's a pretty good compliment coming from God. And he was head and shoulders above everybody else, so you can know how the women are. Tall, dark, and handsome, whatever. I don't know if he's dark, but anyway, he was tall and handsome. And so we know that about him. Yes, Scott?
You read a lot about God influencing men's hearts in different ways, hardening or opening and such. What do you believe? What does it mean when it says it gave him a new heart in chapter 10?
You know, that is a really good question. He became another man. When he was first anointed, and he was hiding. So what does that tell you about him? Shy, humble. But when he goes against the Ammonites, he's anything but shy. He's a different man.
From doing that and start rid of oxen and saying, you come with me.
I'm going to come after your oxen. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he was a changed man. There's no question about that. Timid, kind of introverted to extreme extrovert. That'd be one way of describing it. To a fault. His extroversion became his undoing, I think, eventually. But yeah, I think that that's one way of describing it. When I think of the qualities I see here, I think of a man of duty. When we first read of Saul, what was he doing? He was looking for his father's donkeys. You say, so? What's the big deal? There's a man on my detail. He's serving time as we speak for, well, he was a counterfeiter. But he's serving time on my detail. He's been in prison for about 2 years. He's 47. Well, he just turned 48. And he told me this morning, he said, I had a regular job, and I know what it's like to work a regular job. I was trying to instruct him on what to do. He said, I know what it's like to work a regular job. I had a job till I was 17. He's 48. So how did he survive from the time he was 17 until he was 46? Well, he's with me, so that gives you some idea of how he made his living. It would have been better for him had he been a responsible young man, had a father figure in his life who would have taught him, hey, go get the donkeys when they get out. And he would have been responsible enough to go look for his father's donkeys. He was a conscientious young man. You say, that's huge. When I think of the people that I'm dealing with day in and day out in my particular line of work, it's tragic because these are young men that didn't learn this simple, fundamental fact of life. You have to work and labor and be responsible for your own stuff. You don't take other people's things. You don't make a living by taking the fast track, and selling drugs and selling your body and getting involved in other kind of illegal enterprises. That's no way to live your life. Rather, you should learn to be... So you can say that about Saul. That's a good quality. He's a responsible young man who was a young man with a sense of duty, doing what his father would have him to do. He was interested in the welfare of others. When he was coming in from the field working, he's a new king, by the way. He's out plowing the field, but as he's coming in from the fields, he heard word that the Ammonites are attacking. And the people of Jabesh Gilead are under assault. And when he heard about the plight of the people of Jabesh Gilead, he rallied all of Israel to go rescue them. So he was certainly interested in the welfare of others. He obviously was a courageous man. Could be because the Spirit of God had changed him into such. And yes, he was still a humble man. So there are a lot of good qualities. But they say power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's an unfortunate thing. Because this first king of God's choice, and there's no mistaking it, this was God's choice for their first king. That he started out on the right foot and had all the qualities characteristics of a great leader. But it was not to last. We're going to see that as we continue in our study further. Turn to chapter 12. Any question about chapter 10 and 11? We need to try to progress if we can. And there's going to be some interesting things said in this chapter, and I want you to pay careful attention to verses 16 through 18 when we get there in this chapter. Fascinating. Kind of dovetails into what we were talking about last week. Now Samuel said to all Israel, "Indeed, I have heeded your voice in all that you said to me, and have made a king over you. And now here is the king walking before you, and I'm old and gray-headed, and look, my sons are with you. I have walked before you from my childhood to this day. Here I am." Witness, by the way, this is his retirement ceremony. He's not retiring from being a prophet. He's retiring from being a judge. And this is his retirement speech. "Here I am, witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken, or whose donkey have I taken, or who have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed, or from whom hand have I received any bribe with which to blind my eyes? I will restore it to you." And they said, "You have not cheated us or oppressed us, nor have you taken anything from any man's hand." Then he said to them, "The Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day." His anointed would be who? Saul. "That you have not found anything in my hand." So me and the king are together, and we're all confirming here. I'm going to sign it, and he's going to notarize it. And they answered, "He is witness." Samuel said to the people, "It is the Lord who raised up Moses." Now this is where we get to be preachery now. "It is the Lord who raised up Moses and Aaron, and who brought your fathers up from the land of Egypt. Now therefore stand still, that I may reason with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did to you and your fathers. When Jacob had gone into Egypt, and your fathers cried out to the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt, and made them dwell in this place. And when they forgot the Lord their God, he sold them into the hand of Sisera, commander of the army of Hazor, into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against him. Then they cried out to the Lord and said, 'We have sinned because we have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroths. But now deliver us from the hand of our enemies, and we will serve you.' And the Lord sent Zerubbabel, Bedan, Jephthah, and Samuel," yeah, he's speaking of himself, "and delivering you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you dwelt in safety. And when you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, 'No, but a king shall reign over us,' when the Lord your God was your king." You understand the point of his sermon. He just stated for you. My brother taught me years ago, if you're going to preach a sermon that's effective, that people remember, you have to be able to summarize your sermon in one sentence. If you can summarize your sermon in one sentence, you've nailed it, a home run. I thought that's good advice for anyone who's delivering a public speech. He just nailed it right here in this last statement. "No, but a king shall reign over us when the Lord your God was your king." That's the point of his sermon. "Now therefore, he is the king whom you have chosen and whom you have desired. And take note that the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice, do not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then both you and the king who reigns over you will continue following the Lord your God. However, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you as it was against your fathers. Now therefore, stand and see this great thing which the Lord will do before your eyes. Is today not the wheat harvest? I will call to the Lord, and he will send thunder and rain, that you may perceive and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord in asking a king for yourselves." So Samuel called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, "Pray for your servants of the Lord your God, that we may not die, for we have added to all our sins the evil of asking a king for ourselves." Yeah, I raised the question last week. Was it wrong for them to ask for a king? How do you answer that question now? How did they answer that question? How did Samuel answer that question? Samuel didn't say it's just a sin, it's great wickedness. But then Deuteronomy 17 is still in our Bibles. And I'm still raising the same question I did last week. Why did Moses, centuries before, speak about coming to the land of promise, settling there, and in time you ask for a king like the nations around you? What was their sin? Had God simply prophetically spoken through Moses, this is what's going to happen? And when it does happen, this is the kind of king you're to appoint? But that God would be displeased with it? Or was there something about the kind of king they wanted and the motivation for wanting a king that was so wicked? I'm not so sure that it's not the latter question that I'm raising. I think it has more to do with their motive, their intent, what they had in mind. Certainly God envisioned them having a king. Deuteronomy 17. It's there. Read it for yourself. He envisioned them having a king, and yet when they asked for a king, it was great wickedness. And they even acknowledged and confessed their great sin in asking for a king. But there's something about this kind of king. And specifically, remember when they said what they did, and he repeats it again here. What was it, verse 12? When you saw that Nahash, king of the Ammonites, came against you. That's when they said, we want a king. And notice what he does when he goes over the history of Israel. When you were in Egypt, you cried out to me, and God answered you. When you came to the land of Canaan and forgot about God, but then you were oppressed by your enemies, you cried out to me, and God delivered you. God saved you. God's been your defender, your captain. He's been your king all this time. Now you want someone to take his place. That was their sin. That was their great wickedness. And Samuel's still protesting. Even though he's retiring from the judgeship, relinquishing all that authority now to the new king. He's no longer judge. He's retiring. He's still a prophet. An amazing prophet, by the way. Can you imagine me standing here and preaching and saying, just to make my point, Lord, could you make it thunder and lightning from a clear sky? Probably frighten you, wouldn't it? And that's literally what happened. Just to prove his point. By the way, when you think about God's messengers and God's message, he's always used miraculous signs to confirm his messengers and his message. So there wouldn't be any doubt. It began with Moses. It's confirmed here in Samuel. It was true of the other prophets. It's true of Jesus, who was attested by miracles and wonders and signs, according to Peter in Acts chapter 2, which God did by him in their midst. But anyway, so they prayed and asked God to forgive them for their sin. Verse 20, Samuel said to the people, do not fear, you have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And do not turn aside, for then you would go after empty things which cannot profit or deliver, for they are nothing. And again, you can't really divorce yourself from what he's saying. He's saying, okay, God's accepted it, God's allowing it, but then he's still warning them. Don't run after things that can't profit you. Now, when it comes to God or a man, which one of those two can profit you? God. So if you're going to start looking at this man, you see he's just not going to let them lose sight of this. He's going to continue to warn them. If you're going to take your eyes off God and put it on this man, Isaiah, basically, you could summarize Isaiah's entire ministry. Everything that Isaiah said in dealing with Judah's sins had to do with the fact they were taking their attention, their faith away from God, putting it in other nations, putting it in their own king, rather than serving or seeking God's help. And so you could summarize Isaiah's entire ministry with this very thought that Samuel first enumerates to Israel. Verse 22, for the Lord will not forsake his people, for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you his people. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, but I will teach you the good and the right way. In other words, I'm retiring from being a judge, but I'm going to continue to be a preacher. I'm going to continue to teach you. I'm not going to give up teaching and preaching. I'm going to continue to do that. I won't be a judge, but I'll continue to do that. And so he's telling them, it would be a sin for me to stop praying for you. Only, he says, fear the Lord and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. For if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. I want you to think about a few things here before our time runs out completely. Is in his retirement speech, he recovers, or he goes over, recounts, I should say, a good bit of their history. But of course, it's all to make a simple point, which again he summarized verse 12. When you think about what Paul said to Timothy, 1 Timothy 4:6, if you put the brethren in remembrance of these things, you shall be a good minister of Jesus Christ, nourished up in the words of faith and of good doctrine, whereunto thou hast attained. 1 Timothy 4, verse 6. As Paul is telling Timothy there to preachers, generally, not just Timothy, but all preachers, all evangelists. If you're going to fulfill your work as an evangelist, a big part of that work is reminding the brethren. Of what exactly? Well, you go back and read 1 Timothy 4. He's talking about basic fundamental truths of the gospel. I believe it was 1991, 92. I was in class. I shared this with you before. Brother Rex Turner Sr. had fallen asleep during one of his own lectures. And seriously, he had. And he was an old man at the time and wasn't in good health. And he was reading from his syllabus, we call it. And as he was reading, he fell asleep. So we woke him up. And when we woke him up, he apologized to everyone. He's an old man, and he dozed off in class. And so we waited for him to kind of get his composure. And somebody brought him a cup of coffee, and he sat there and talked for a minute. And as he sat there, I think some of the richest instruction I received from him came in the next hour. Had nothing to do with our syllabus or our lesson plan. It had to do with just his musings, his talking out loud as an old man sitting there trying to jolt himself back into reality. And he's sipping coffee and he's just talking to us. And he's recounting the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. And he was talking about churches of Christ in particular, growing like wildfire. I mean, they were just burning hot. And he talked about the kind of preaching that was taking place. And he said, I can tell you right now, there was not a sermon ever preached in any of our pulpits that I'm aware of where the preacher didn't spend a considerable portion of that sermon preaching the 5 steps. He said, that's where we got labeled the 5 steppers. Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. He said, our Baptist friends hated to hear that. It just really got on their nerves. And it just irritated everybody because we just keep on pounding and preaching. And he said, made a lot of people mad. But it saved a lot of people. And he was pointing out how there were a lot of people that were upset about it, angry about it, but a lot of people weren't. And he started talking about the kind of preaching that was done. Basic, fundamental preaching. I mean, just every Sunday. He said, but then the 1960s came along and we started building bigger church buildings. We started building bigger colleges. We kind of got to be, big shots. We're the new kid on the block. And our preachers started becoming more sophisticated, and they wanted to make sure that the brethren in the pew, and this is how he put it, we wanted to make sure the brethren in the pew knew how much we knew, how much knowledge we had accumulated, how smart we were. So we started preaching stuff they had no idea what we're talking about. He didn't say it exactly like that, but that's what he said. Never underestimate the ignorance of your audience. He didn't mean that to be ugly, brethren. He was just saying, never underestimate the ignorance of your audience. And he said, so while preachers up there just showing off their book knowledge, people in the pew are going, huh? Had no idea what they're talking about. And he said, but we tolerated that for a while. They said, and then we started stagnating. And then we started digressing. He said, and I'm seeing, and he was quoting from Hebrews 2. He said, I'm seeing us drifting away from that kind of preaching that made us the powerhouse we were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even throughout the 60s. We were a force to be reckoned with in the religious community. Not so much so anymore. And I think what we're seeing in Samuel here is something that I as a preacher and every other preacher needs to be reminded of. It's not so important to always go ahead of everyone and show how much you've learned and what new clever things and sayings you can come up with, as it is to just simply remind people. I know that when I say you need to be reminded, I'm saying that because I need to be reminded. I'm constantly having to be reminded. Herman is teaching a series on the book of Hebrews on Sunday morning. And I didn't tell anyone this till just now, but it bothers me because while he's up here teaching this class, I'm thinking, you know what, just about 12 years ago, I memorized the book of Hebrews. And I preached a whole series of sermons on the book of Hebrews. I memorized the book of Hebrews. I doubt I could even get through half of chapter 2 now without having to go back over it again. And only then in the old King James. I couldn't possibly do it in the New King James or the English Standard Version. And I'm thinking, how did I forget that? I mean, I worked so hard to learn it. But you know how I forgot it? I didn't quote it every day. I just didn't use it like that every day. And it don't take long. It just goes out of your mind. And so I have to go and look it up. And that makes me mad. I'm like, I knew where that was, and I have to go look it up. You know? I think it's chapter 7, no, chapter 9. And the Melchizedek thing is really confusing. Anybody ever studied Hebrews? I'm like, but he just said this. The phrases are all repetitive phrases. That's really aggravating too. But we need to be reminded of basic fundamental truths. There's a lot of drifting that Brother Turner was talking about in our congregations today. And it's sad because many of our brethren are basically wouldn't probably make a lot of difference. They just tore down their sign and just erected some denominational sign out front. Their preaching wouldn't reflect any difference. People ought to be able to come to our services and hear something different than what you would typically hear in a denominational church. This is not a denominational church. This is just a group of believers who have simply obeyed the gospel and have been added by the Lord to his church. And that's who we are. We're just Christians. And that's who all believers should just strive to be. Christians. Nothing more, nothing less. Just followers of Jesus Christ. And those are simple, basic truths we need to be reminding ourselves of constantly. Any other thoughts or comments you have along those lines? Or some other line from chapter 12? What did...
Right or wrong is the key. Israel requested king. Interesting to me, like in chapter 8, whenever Israel first commanded king, whenever they first commanded king, they actually used Samuel for the reason that they needed king. It said, in the Bible, like God just flat out, sons do not walk in his ways. And the elders of Israel gathered together and they consulted, like, look, Samuel's appointed his 2 sons as judges, and they walk not in his ways. So actually use Samuel as the reason that they need a king, or a king. But then it's amazing how quickly it changes. As soon as Samuel goes and consults the Lord and comes back, the next thing we're told, after Samuel warns them, is they changed their tune from, that's because of you and your sons that we couldn't be the king, to now they say, they were the real motive or what it was to stay behind. And that would be like other nations. So it could be, to me, it could be that they were not wrong at the beginning when they said, look, you're appointing your sons and they're not following their ways. So let's get someone who will. Like Moses was talking about, because God will appoint him. If he will walk in their ways, and then by the time he comes back consulting with the Lord, the tune has changed. And now maybe the sinful part we're talking about sort of like
It's hard to say. I mean, like I say, Deuteronomy 17 envisions them doing this very thing. When they did it, it was called great wickedness. I mean, I don't know. I know one thing, it didn't work out too well for them to have a king. Number 812, please, in your psalm books. Ladies, your night out is tomorrow night at Luther's Bistro at Villa Rica at 6:30 p.m. Also, don't forget the annual youth lectures at Lithia Springs, Saturday and Sunday, November the 11th and 12th. Do we have any other details on that, Scott? I mean, I don't know of any other we need to share. Well, there's the area-wide youth devotional also on the 12th, starting at 5. Any of you that are interested, please see Scott for more details about that. Yeah, Lithia Springs, yeah.
Actually, I would not be able to attend the Saturday meeting.
Okay.
So, of course, I encourage
elders and deacons meeting will be this Sunday following the morning worship. I would suggest it would be nice if all the wives and husbands, I suppose, can do that too, but bring food and we can eat together after the morning service and then just have our meeting following. But, that'd be up to each elders and deacon, I guess, to do that for themselves. But this Sunday, following the morning worship, we will have a very important meeting with elders and deacons. There's also be a Thanksgiving celebration on Friday, November the 17th at 6 p.m. here at the building. Please bring your favorite Thanksgiving food to share. And I just read this for the first time, first I've heard of it. This is a really neat thing we're doing. Right now my mind is thinking about all my favorite Thanksgiving food to share. And that's going to be really cool. When is that? When is the 17th? A week from Friday. All right then. 6 p.m. here at the building. Cool. Elder recommendations, as was announced this past Lord's Day. If you have any suggestions for potential new elders, please see one of the elders or hand those suggestions in, and we will consider them accordingly. There's a shower box on the table in the foyer for Angela Gray. Diapers and wipes, please. Gift cards also welcome, or you can give directly to Angela or Regina if she was here. Regina's not with us tonight. Ann Smith had knee replacement surgery today at the hospital in Douglasville, but understand from the update we saw just before service, she's already been up and walking and exercising, so apparently things went well, and we're very happy to announce that. Stan McGuire is recovering from eye surgery this past Monday. Also, George Harris, Ann Spain's brother, continues at room 208 here in Villa Rica. Is that true? Is he still there? Oh, they transferred him to rehab. He is in Bremen. Okay. Thank you for that. Suffering severe renal failure. We want to remember him. And, of course, our good sister in our prayers. Al Gaddis is still not well. Had to visit the ER Sunday with the flu. And I want to remember him in our prayers. And he had to go back yesterday. Okay. Also, Larry Bingham, Renee and Regina's stepfather, is not well at all. And Regina has gone to relieve her other sister, the renegade sister in Tennessee. And Renee will be going back sometime, I guess, in the coming days. But it's certainly a mission of mercy. And please remember them as they travel and for the good work they're doing there and helping their mother and, of course, their stepfather. But please remember Larry is a good man and suffering as we speak. Yes. Yes, I was going to get to that next. I spoke with him today. He is some better. Still said, I think he's got a towel over his head and the evaporator, or he called it evaporator. I think he meant vaporizer. But anyway, he called it evaporator. I said, okay. But he got the towel over his head. When I've had bronchitis myself before, that is miserable. And anyway, I was glad that he was able to talk, and he apparently said he got cabin fever, so that's a very good thing. Yeah. Yes, sir. Very happy to see Brother Wheeler with us tonight. And I pray your treatments continue to go well. Yes, sir. We have financial reports on the table, and Jonathan is going to make sure that you have a copy of this, if he doesn't mind. He's volunteered to do that. Appreciate that, Jonathan. They're on the table. Your song number? 812. Number 812. Be our song of invitation, encouragement. We didn't get to this part in our class tonight, but perhaps, Lord's willing, next week. Saul was chosen by God to be the first king of Israel. And he had admirable qualities and was initially a great leader and was on the right track. But he didn't stay on the right track. And when Samuel first again retired from his judgeship and transferred his power and his authority to the new king, he reminded Israel that if they would continue to follow the Lord and fear the Lord and do his will, that God would continue to bless them and deliver them and their king. But if their king and themselves ceased to fear the Lord, then God would no longer defend them nor protect them. So it was conditional. There's a very insidious doctrine been taught for many years That once an individual becomes a child of God, he or she is always a child of God and can never forfeit their salvation. When I hear that, I'm asking myself initially, why then did God write the New Testament, period? Why did he give us this New Testament and warn us repeatedly, take heed lest you fall? And of course, the point I'm making is not to say, hey, be careful because you can fall, because you can. My point is to say that we have to be careful that we do not fall. The fact is we can fall, but our prayer is that we do not fall, that we not lose our faithful walk with God. But aren't you glad to know that if we do stumble and falter, we can always return to our first love and make things right? Maybe there's some present tonight that need to respond to heaven's invitation for this very reason. If we can assist you in this or any other way, please make that need known while together we stand as we sing.
All things are ready, come to the feast, come for